My name is Brian Stewart.
Maggie Sywink.
Marcus Harvey.
Omer Ali.
My name is Jenna Evelyn.
I don't know who to vote for.
I am very undecided in who I'm going to vote for.
I am undecided.
I don't know who to vote for.
What do I care about?
Climate change.
I care about immigration.
Inclusiveness.
The most important issue for me is affordability, particularly for Canadian families.
I have questions.
I have questions.
I need answers.
My vote matters.
This is my time.
This is my time.
It's my turn.
It's my turn.
And welcome again to the National Studio here in Toronto, where tonight we are again doing something a little new. We promised that this election would be about you, your questions, your concerns. So, unusually, we've decided to give as much of our interview time with the federal leaders over to you, the voters, and they have, thankfully, agreed. Welcome once again to Face with the federal leaders. I'm Rosemary Barton, and in our studio tonight, undecided voters again, looking for answers. And we've invited 5 Canadians from across the country to speak one-on-one with the leaders. 5 different Canadians than you saw before. They get 5 minutes uninterrupted to speak directly to the leaders. And after their conversations, I will follow up. But really, this time is about them and about the voter. Last night, Canadians heard from Justin Trudeau, and tonight, it's Conservative leader Andrew Scheer's turn. Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Thank you. I know you're a busy guy, so I appreciate making the time.
It's my pleasure. Thanks very much.
And so everybody knows, because they often wonder how much you've been told. You were given the first name, hometown, broad strokes of what these people want to talk about, but otherwise, you're on your own.
That's right.
Each participant has shot a little bit of a video, so you can get to know them a little bit. So let's get going.
Sounds great.
All right.
Thank you.
Hello friends, Marcus Harvey here along the mighty Woolastook, aka the St. John River. I am coming to you from Majorville, New Brunswick, which is about 10 kilometers east of the capital city of Fredericton. My family has been here for 100 years and I've been here for about 50 of them. I'm married, I've got 3 sons, and in my spare time I enjoy drinking and collecting whiskey, amateur photography, hanging by the pool, but mainly watching my kids play sports. Now where I'm standing now in 2018 and 2019, we had the most epic and destructive floods of all time. So one of my main concerns for this election is what a potentially new government and Prime Minister are going to do to steer Canada in our fight against climate change and global warming. Hopefully doing it all without sticking their hands in my pants and taking my hard-earned tax dollars. Time will tell.
All right, Marcus, over to you.
How are you now?
I'm doing great.
You're not nervous?
I'd love to know what kind of whiskey you enjoy.
We'll get to that maybe later on. I want to talk to you today about climate stress. People like myself, who you just saw, have gone through a couple of floods. People have gone through major weather events. Now, I live in Majorville, like you just saw. I'm 50 years old. I know I don't look it. And for the first 40 years of my life, we've had 4 floods. In the last 10, we've had 7. If the water goes over the road next year, it'll be 4 in 4.
Wow.
So I'm one of those climate stressed people. Add on top of this, certain world leaders that are kind of just sitting on their hands and doing nothing. Here in Canada, we have Prime Minister Trudeau, who decided to bring a carbon tax in, which for somebody who's middle class like me, is hitting my bottom line pretty hard. Now, I also noticed this campaign, he's going to plant 2 billion trees in 10 years. It's better than throwing our hands in the air and saying to hell with it, but it's, you know, it's a Band-Aid, but it's, you know, cold comfort when you've got Bolsonaro down there burning and slashing, I think, 1 trillion trees a year down out of the Amazon, the lungs of the earth. So, stress. So my question for you is, do you understand the gravity of climate change and global warming? And should you form government, what is Canada going to do? What are you going to do to help fight climate change and global warming as a country?
Well, thanks very much for the question. I can tell that it's something that you're very passionate about, and rightly so, given the impact that it's had.
Since I've been underwater the last 2 years.
Yeah, exactly. So first and foremost, absolutely, I believe that tackling climate change and reducing emissions is a priority will be a priority for the Conservative government. You talked about how the carbon tax is having an impact on middle-class families. We know that they're paying more. All the while, under this current government, there's been a major exemption granted to large industrial emitters. So what our plan does is it will force large industrial emitters to pay into a green investment fund that will stimulate research and development. And we're also going to invest in mitigation and adaptation. You mentioned flooding. We're going to add a lens to federal infrastructure programs specifically designed to mitigate against the impacts of climate change. So where there are increased incidences of flooding, those municipalities will be eligible for funding to help
And we
mitigate
did have
against
that where I'm from, like we had mitigation, but the stress of it all, like for someone like me in that area, we had people that were displaced for 2 weeks. We had people that were displaced for an entire year waiting for funding and mitigation. We had people that totally lost their homes. Mitigation is great, but my question is what are you going to do that's immediate, that's fiscally responsible and sustainable to tackle this? Because it is, you and I aren't going to live to see the end of the world, but our grandchildren could very well burn. So it's got to be addressed immediately.
Well, as I said, mitigation is part of it, but you rightly point out that the focus has to be on reducing emissions and avoiding the effects going forward. And taking the climate change fight global is a huge part of it. Molecules of CO2 don't need a passport to travel around the world. So if we can export carbon capture technology, if we can help other countries deal with their emissions as well, we should pursue that. Our green home renovation tax credit will also incentivize Canadians to invest in their home, reducing their emissions and their energy consumption bills while putting a tax credit back in your pocket.
Okay, that's time.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
You can stay. I'm going to keep going for you.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Oh,
all
sorry.
right. Yeah, that's
All right.
Yeah.
We'll kick back.
First of all, maybe Mr. Scheer didn't want to remind you, but the Liberals do actually provide you with a rebate for the carbon tax, and the Parliamentary Budget Officer says that 80% of Canadians are better off.
Can I challenge that?
You can
I
do whatever you like.
You go first. Yes,
let Mr. Scheer do it.
I'll defer to...
Well, do you not see the rebate?
I do, but for me, I've got 3 kids, as you saw on the screen there. One of them 6'3" and 230 pounds. He eats a lot. So my grocery bill a week can be $350. I'm spending money on gas, home heating, everything like that. The rebate, it's a Band-Aid to the taxes that they're taking away, and I'm not seeing it used in a way that it should be used.
That's fair. Go ahead, Mr. Scheer.
And just to that point, the Parliamentary Budget Officer had to use the numbers that the Liberal government gave him. So it's based on an assumption that I don't accept. I don't believe Justin Trudeau when he says Canadians are going to be better off. I don't think Canadians have ever seen a tax that makes them richer.
You've talked a lot about lowering global emissions, and you say you can do that by selling green technology to other countries that we would get credit for. How many megatons of lowering CO2 emissions would that get us to?
Well, just if you look at China's electrical grid and the thousands of power plants in China that are powered by coal, providing them and facilitating and exporting clean coal technology or carbon capture technology can help reduce. If only 100 of them adopted that very technology, we could reduce our emissions by almost 100 megatons. So, about a third of our targets can be accomplished just by that alone. These are all things that we can work on together in a comprehensive way.
Mark Jacquard, who's a climate scientist at Simon Fraser, says that your emissions will go up, and Canada's emissions will go up under your plan. And most economists in the world believe that carbon pricing has to be part of the solution, not the whole thing, but part of it. Why is it so incomprehensible for you that you can't even consider a climate tax or a price on carbon?
It's not working. It's not working. It's not working under the federal government's plan. So based on the fact that it's not working, why would we continue to go down
That's not true that it's not working. We're 73 megatons now from meeting our 2030 targets. So I'm not sure how you can say that it's not working because it's gone down over time.
Well, when you look at when the carbon tax was brought in, and the fact that Canada is falling further behind our targets, to me, that is a conclusion that it's not working, and the cost of everything else is going up. You're from Atlantic Canada. I've met with people in the fishing industry. Their number one input cost is fuel, and so when you're talking about an industry that has a very short window to make a living for the rest of the year, that's a huge impact on families. And when you talk about putting in place a regime where there is a cost of emitting CO2, our plan does that on the large industrial emitter side. It's actually more ambitious than the Liberal plan. What we will not do is collect that revenue as a tax for the government. We're going to make sure that stays in the R&D field, partnering with universities and other types of funds that stimulate innovation.
Marcus, how are you feeling?
I'm feeling fine. When it comes to the carbon tax that you two are kind of bickering back and forth about, I'm a realist. I live in rural New Brunswick, so I need to drive a gas car back and forth to my work. I've got to feed my family. I've got to heat my home. I can't afford a Tesla. I can't afford an electric car. So for me, the carbon tax, it's not changing my behaviors. I mean, I already recycle and reduce and do what I can, but taxing, you know, when I see the tax dollars going to the government, no offense, but overall, I find the government are, you know, they're slicker than deer guts on the doorknob. They're, you know,
I don't know that expression, Marcus.
That is a new one. I might try to use that throughout the campaign. But you do not offend a conservative when you say there needs to be less government.
yes, less government and less taxes.
Hear, hear.
Less in my pocket. I can, you know, I need more to feed the kids.
Okay. Thanks, Marcus. Appreciate it. All right, let's move on to our next voter.
My name is Jenna Evelyn, and I live in Saint-Georges-de-Beauce, which is a small city in southern Quebec. I am a 7th-generation Canadian. I live here with my husband and our son, who is 19 months old, and we have another baby on the way. I work here in Saint-Georges as an immigration lawyer. I help a lot of immigrants come to our region, study to work. I'm an undecided voter, but this year I've been considering changing my vote, so I'd like to question the Conservatives on their immigration policies to see whether it would be something that I could get in line with.
Hi there.
Hi, it's nice to meet you.
Very nice to meet you.
Thank you for taking time to meet with me.
My pleasure.
So as you saw, a big issue for me is immigration, both personally and professionally, because professionally I work in an immigration firm, and so I work with a lot of businesses that are bringing in foreign workers that want to stay as permanent residents, but I also run an immigration clinic where I meet with the families. I'm meeting with people who are struggling to bring their families over, who are struggling to be able to stay as permanent residents and to navigate the system. In the last 4 years, I've seen that the Liberal government has made a lot of efforts to improve the system, to try and open things up, to help people, to facilitate, to come talk to stakeholders. I want to know, if you form the government, the next government, will your government be as open to immigration and as facilitative as the current government has been?
Well, absolutely. We will have an open and inclusive and welcoming immigration policy that will ensure that Canada has much needed new Canadians coming to our country to keep our population growing and to fill in gaps in our workforce, and to continue to be a safe place for people fleeing persecution, civil war, or natural disasters. So I'm very proud of the fact that the previous Conservative government had welcomed record levels of new Canadians from around the world, and that's a legacy that I'll continue to build on.
Okay, I appreciate that answer, because one thing I noticed on your platform website, it seems very open to immigration, but the concern I have is that on the ground, in the reality of things, is that it seems to be very, generally the policies seem to be very focused on economic immigration, which is important. So we have people coming here who are told, come, stay, we want to keep you, but we're going to make it super difficult for you to reunite with your family. We're going to make it super difficult for you and expensive for you to stay here. And we're not going to give you any support with that. It's complicated. What is your government going to do to really emphasize the fact that we want to help these people integrate and stay?
Well, that is an excellent question. And I think if you spoke to most members of Parliament, the number one source of constituency casework is immigration. And it's precisely that. It's people who have come to Canada for any number of reasons, who are now trying to sponsor a family member or be reunited with a loved one. And it's incredibly difficult. As you know, being a lawyer, it's an incredibly difficult process with lots of things to navigate through. And you mentioned rightly that it's not just about high tech or professionals that Canada needs. We need all different kinds of workers, and in many different regions of the country, there are different needs. So what we're going to be focusing on, and we'll talk a little bit about this a little bit more in the campaign, is a better pathway to permanence, where people who have come over filling a need in our economy as a temporary worker have better flexibility, have the option to come and have that pathway to permanence. So we'll be speaking about that, and as well, a component of our immigration policy will also focus on family reunification.
And will you also be willing to look at regional differences to make sure that the policies are effective where we've got the problems? For instance, in Quebec, in my region, we have the lowest unemployment rate in the country. It's in our region especially, it's very difficult then to find the workers. But what we are also finding is that the policies that we have they're federal. They tend to apply to the whole country, but our region, our reality is very different. And what we need is a government that's willing to look at that, work with stakeholders on the ground to find solutions that work for the different realities that we're living in. For instance, in Quebec right now, we've got a new policy that says to our Muslim foreign workers, you know, your children, your young daughters are not going to be able to ever consider becoming teachers or judges because of our problem with the secularism law. And that's something that affects whether immigrants are going to be willing to stay and work and integrate their families. But I feel like the federal government is trying to pass that off as, it's not really our problem. But each region has its own reality, and it's important to us that the federal government's willing to look at us as a separate from just the whole country as a whole.
You're absolutely right. This is a country that is so diverse in so many different ways, economically as well. And while there can be high unemployment in some areas, we're seeing in Alberta and Saskatchewan a lot of job losses because of the decision by this government to cancel pipelines and to drive out investment in our energy sector. But then in other areas like Quebec, as you mentioned, very low unemployment rates and a need for workers. There are so many duplications between provincial and federal levels of government. And one of the things I believe in is simplifying that. So for example, in Quebec, there's often a necessity for a labor market opinion to determine whether or not there is a need in a particular area. And then there's a federal requirement for that as well. And often when a permit is granted, on the labor market opinion side, the clock starts ticking before the person actually gets the visa. So they're often coming to Canada and they've already lost 2 or 3 months of their ability to work here. And that's creating a whole slew of problems for employers and for people who want to come to Canada.
Let's follow up on Bill 21, because that's a reality that Jenna's living with. Would a Conservative government do anything, say anything about a piece of legislation that prevents people from wearing religious symbols in public jobs?
So I've made my position on this very clear. The Conservative Party has always been the party that stands up for individual freedom and celebrates our freedoms here, freedom of expression, freedom of religion. So this is not something we would ever pursue at a federal level. It's before the courts right now in Quebec, and ultimately the courts will pronounce on this.
But doesn't that then mean, if following logically, wouldn't that mean that you would have to take a stand and intervene if needed on a federal level?
Well, we're not going to intervene in the process in Quebec. This is not something that we would ever pursue federally. We're not going to impose this federally at all. And at the federal level, we'll always continue to be that voice of religious freedom and individual liberty.
But how can you be the voice of religious freedom if you're not going to do anything to protect the people in Quebec?
Well, it is before the courts right now in Quebec. This is a decision that the Quebec government has taken, and so ultimately the courts will pronounce on this.
Can you tell me immigration levels? I'm not sure that you've said yet what your immigration levels you're going to set them at. What number are you looking at? Is it as high as what the Liberals have now, given our aging demographic, or where is your head at for that?
Well, this is an excellent question, because I really do believe that this should be a number that is not politicized in nature. This should be a number that is arrived at when Statistics Canada and experts in various fields say we need this many people to come to fulfill the gaps in the workplace, or to ensure that we have a growing population, combined with a humanitarian component for family reunification and refugees. So there will be some who will have an auction to go higher and higher, and some parties will have an auction to go lower and lower to kind of politicize it. But what I'm saying is it shouldn't be a subject of politicization. I think Canadians have confidence in their immigration system when it's working right, which is why we want to address the issue at the borders, so that people can see and have confidence that our immigration program is based on orderliness, fairness, and compassion.
That's all great. Depoliticize the issue, but you still didn't give a number, and you would have to set a target as government. That's part of your job, is to set a government. So a level. So if the target right now is 350,000 immigrants by 2021, is that about what you're looking at? Or
I think that's reasonable. Yeah, and again, as long as that's coming from facts, from evidence, from a look at the situation and an understanding of where our society has needs, then absolutely.
Thanks. All right, let's move on to our next questioner.
I'm at the base of Dreamers Rock in my home community of Whitefish River First Nation, where I was born and raised in the province of Ontario 57 years ago. My name is Maggie Sywink. I come from a large extended family of 12 siblings and 43 nieces and nephews. This is the first year that I've ever registered for a federal election. Some of the concerns that I have include, will the government create a balanced budget while maintaining services to marginalized Canadians? Good morning, Mr. Scheer. My name is Ani Beaujeu. Welcome to the lands of the Mississauga of New Credit. We welcome you here. I think most importantly for me as an Indigenous woman, when I think about fiscal responsibility, is I look at my own spending. And I think that that's really important for me to look at the potential government that's coming in to ensure that they have a policy in place that will continue services for marginalized Canadians. So you may be thinking about a lot of cuts, but you still need to provide those services for Canadians. My vote will depend on that, for sure. My vote will also depend on your willingness to look at things like, for instance, my sister is one of the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls in this country, and it's been 25 years. So I would like to know your commitment to the grassroots families of the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, and how you're going to address the intergenerational healing that is necessary for us to move forward.
Yeah. Well, first of all, my deepest sympathies and condolences. I cannot even imagine the grief and hardship that you're continuing to go through with the loss of a loved one. And I want to assure you that when we talk about getting back to balanced budgets, we're going to do that in a way that maintains core services, essential services, healthcare, social programs as well. Conservatives believe that the role of government is there to help those who cannot help themselves. So when you talk about marginalized Canadians, that is precisely where we think there is a legitimate and much needed role for government. So we've made that commitment to maintain funding for those services and increase it and improve it in areas where we know it can make a difference. Where we've announced that we're going to eliminate spending to get back to balanced budgets is on things like corporate welfare, where we see billions of dollars going to highly profitable companies or CEOs and shareholders. So that's how we're going to get back to balanced budgets. We're going to maintain the funding for those core services.
So I have not heard a lot of talk from your campaign about how you're going to work with the commitment with Indigenous treaties, honoring the treaties of Indigenous people in this country.
Well, as you may know, I represent a large territory of Treaty 4 in Saskatchewan, and I've had a very good and open working relationship with AFN Chief Perry Bellegarde. We might not agree on everything, and he's very vocal and he's very outspoken, but we do have that open dialogue that I value a great deal. I've also called for more dynamic consultations, so it's not just a question of someone with a clipboard, but it's an actual representative of the minister taking those concerns seriously. We've also talked about increasing investments on things like quality of water on reserves, so that the people on reserve can have the same access to clean drinking water as every other Canadian.
Very basic right in this country, that every
Yeah,
Indigenous community on boiled water advisories, which I know some individuals who have been born into that, and they still have boiled water advisories. So it's a really huge concern for me that I think the Conservative government needs to seriously take a look at. Most importantly, I think for me, it's not the spending, it is the spending wisely.
Yes.
That is critical in the way my vote will be looking forward to ensure that the government coming in will do those things for Canadian people. I do not want tax dollars spent like there's a blank check. We need to balance budgets. We need to ensure that we still have services for people in this country that really need them.
Well, you're absolutely right. Conservatives don't measure the success of government by how much dollars are spent. We measure it on results. Are we actually getting what we're paid for, what we've paid for? So I'd like to work with Indigenous leaders and say, okay, let's not just give a block of money to build a water facility. Let's make sure that there's ongoing funds for training, because many times a facility is built, but then because there aren't people on reserve to maintain and keep the facility up and running over the long term, there's a need for that as years go by.
I think most importantly for people that I know around the country, Indigenous people, that you need to start working with grassroots activists, people who are on the ground, people who know what's needed on the ground. Sometimes the leaders aren't in touch with those things because they come from another place. So, you know, if you do that work and you make those promises, then you must actually do that.
Okay, so not just the leadership, but also the people on the ground.
Not just the figureheads, because some of those people are out of touch.
Okay. I appreciate that feedback. Thank you.
You mind if I take a little bit of time?
Of course.
I'm going to go too. So you talk about maintaining core services. Let's stick to Indigenous issues. The Liberals have increased that budget about $21 billion since 2016. Annually, it's about $7 billion. Do you commit to keeping that funding where it's at?
Yeah, we've made the commitment that that the services, transfers to the provinces, investments in services for people will be maintained, and so absolutely.
No, but specifically that Indigenous budget, that's going to remain the same. Yeah. Okay. You have 12 First Nations in your own riding. It's a big riding in Saskatchewan. What are your thoughts on reconciliation, and how do you plan to move that forward?
Mm-hmm. Well, I was very honored to be a part of the party when we were in government to recognize the impact of the residential school system, the tragedy that created for Indigenous Canadians all across this country, that historic apology, and the funding that went with it, not just to compensate survivors and relatives, but also to promote things like education so that people understand how it happened, so we make sure it doesn't happen again. I also believe that an important part of improving the quality of life for Indigenous Canadians is economic reconciliation as well, and ensuring that rural Indigenous communities that are in rural and remote locations across Canada have the same abilities to partner with energy companies, mining companies. That's where the bulk of the jobs available to Indigenous communities in rural and remote locations are mining, energy, forestry. So we have to get those projects up and running again as well.
Okay. But what you're talking about is sort of financial solutions to things and reconciliation. What about self-governing, trying to move towards self-governing jurisdictions? What about moving past the Indian Act? What about those kinds of things? Are those things that you want a Conservative government to do as well?
Yes, absolutely. And where we have, and we can build on some successes. There have been many agreements in the past few decades. I will give credit to other parties as well. This is something that I think all governments, regardless of political stripe, we may disagree on how, but we all agree on the why, that we must, as a federal government, do more to raise the quality of life for Indigenous Canadians, recognize the mistakes that were done in the past. Our party supports things like the recommendations from the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's inquiry on combating human trafficking and making sure our police services have the resources they need to investigate, promoting Indigenous languages as well.
One last question on UNDRIP, the United Nations Declaration on Indigenous Rights. You said in the first debate that we can't create a system in this country where one group of individuals, one Indigenous community can hold hostage large projects that employ so many Indigenous Canadians. Do you regret that use of language?
What I was conveying is that there are so many Indigenous communities that have signed partnership agreements for pipeline projects, and when there is opposition to it, and the concentration is on the opposition, but we lose sight of all the benefits, that I understand the frustration of all those Indigenous groups and communities and First Nations that are eager to have these projects go ahead, and that's the focus.
But you don't support the application of that declaration in this country?
Well, we support many aspects of that declaration. There is one that we have particular concerns with, and that is that under that legislation, that before anything can be
declaration, yeah.
Well, the legislation that would enact it
right.
Calls for these types of large projects to go forward, there must be free, prior, and informed consent, and that is not defined. So it's not. There's no definition of what that means. Does that mean unanimity? Does that mean before you can put a shovel in the ground anywhere in this country, every single Indigenous group has to say yes? This goes beyond the duty to consult into an area that has not been defined, and so I believe that we can move forward with many of those aspects of it, but that's the one that would hold up a big economic piece in this country.
What do you think, Maggie, of what you heard so far there?
Well, I mean, it all sounds good, but, you know, again, you know, sometimes these are broken promises. Sometimes you can say things that will appease the voter prior to that election date, and then, you know, step back on it or not really hold true to what you're saying. And I think most importantly, any promises that politicians make, for me, are just that, the promises. And when they become a reality, or you work hard to make them a reality, if you do get into office, I think I'll commend you. But it's going to take a lot of work to get there.
You've got my commitment on the front end, and you can certainly hold me accountable 4 years from now.
I will.
We'll give you his phone number later.
Yes.
I know where he lives.
Here's our next voter.
My name is Brian Stewart. I live in South Surrey, British Columbia with my wife, my 7-year-old daughter, and my 22-year-old stepson. I work full-time for a building envelope engineering company. We are very concerned, however, with the increased cost of living. We rent the house that we're currently residing in. We would really like to own our home one day, but a down payment of over $200,000 in our neighborhood is unrealistic. What specifically would you do to improve housing affordability and the potential home ownership for thousands of Canadians like ourselves?
Hey, Brian.
Nice to meet you, Andrew. Thank you
nice
for
to
meeting me. I'm really proud to be here representing Canadian families. My question specifically to you is, on October 22nd, you have the potential to be the next government of this country. What specific steps, would you take to put more money in the pockets of ordinary Canadians such as ourselves?
Well, thank you very much for this question. This is the theme of our campaign. It's a government that runs within its, a government that lives within its means, so that we can put more money back in your pockets, so that you can get ahead. That's everything that we're doing is geared around leaving more money in your pockets. It started with our universal tax cut. This is a reduction in the first income tax bracket that, for the average hardworking couple, will mean $850 worth of savings. We're boosting RESPs so that when couples are saving for their children's education, we're increasing the grant that the government puts into that, bringing back the green public transit tax credit. We're going to take the GST and HST off of home heating bills. We're going to bring in the green home renovation tax credit that will allow you to invest.
That's great, but my wife and I don't own a home. Like thousands of Canadians, we rent. In the last 2 years alone, we've had to move twice because of evictions. And our rent has increased from about 35% of our after-tax income to almost 60% in 18 months. We can't save for green home renovations, and the pursuit of home ownership keeps going away and away and away from us. One of the pressures, particularly in British Columbia, is the influence of foreign ownership on Canadian real estate. We have people from outside the country buying up huge plots of land, and to them, home ownership, real estate is just an investment. Would your government commit to closing some of these loopholes to make sure that the playing field is level for all Canadians?
Well, you talked about housing markets in general, and first and foremost, absolutely agree. We don't have a single housing market in this country, and yet the rules that are put in place apply from Vancouver Island to Newfoundland and everything in between. We believe that there should be consideration for regional differences. So one of the things that I've announced is that we are going to rework the stress test. It's had a lot of unintended consequences, and we're going to bring back 30-year mortgages for first-time homebuyers, making that the dream of home ownership more accessible. And one more point on this: when we're talking about affordability and housing prices, we are the only party that is talking about the supply of housing units, about making sure that federal infrastructure dollars are going to municipalities that have a better track record on reducing development times and development fees. Over $100,000 of cost in a new home is due to regulatory requirements at the municipal levels.
I agree. I work for an engineering company, a building science engineering company in Vancouver, but I've also run into people in the last 6 months. A woman, she bought 10 units, 10 condos, strictly as an investment. So we can build all the supply we want, but if we don't deal with some of these foreign pressures, these aren't permanent residents. These aren't people that want to live and work in our community and have a business here. For them, it's a place to park their money and gain another 3 or 4 or 5% a year. It's strictly an investment, like they're buying coal or wheat.
We are committed to looking into those types of things. And specifically also, we've announced that we would launch an inquiry into the phenomenon of money laundering and many criminal organizations using real estate to flip homes or to launder proceeds from crime, which is also having an impact on housing prices.
Right.
Okay, you say that you're going to ease some of the restrictions around the stress test, when the CMHC has said that that stress test actually slows down housing prices, that it helps. So why why go in that direction, given that it's going to do the opposite of what you want, I think?
Well, there are some unintended negative consequences that have arisen from the stress test. For example, you do not have to go through the stress test when you renew your mortgage if you stay with your existing lender.
Right.
So if you're with one of the big banks, they kind of have you over a barrel, because if you want to switch, if you want to go get a more competitive rate, you'd have to re-qualify through the stress test. So that means that many Canadians, when they go up for their mortgage renewals, are not getting the best rate that they might be able to if they were able to shop around.
What else would you change there that would help people like Brian?
Well, as I mentioned, the 30-year amortization for new home buyers. Young couples, when they're purchasing their new home, often have their highest income earning years ahead of them. So getting into a home on the front end, knowing that over time they're actually going to be easier and easier for them to meet their mortgage obligations, is another reason why we would look at changing that part as well.
But household debt levels in Canada are now higher than, I think, in any other G7 nation. So why would you think it's a good idea for young people to be able to buy a house and amortize it over 30 years that they probably can't afford, really?
Well, as I just mentioned, it's precisely the opposite. When you have a young couple that are starting in their careers, they see higher income years later on in their lives. And so getting in on the front end in a home that, being able to qualify for a mortgage over 30 years gets
Didn't 2008 show us that that's not true, though?
No,
and that's why Jim Flaherty made that change, because
Can I clarify something real quick? My wife and I pay $36,000 a year in our rent.
Yeah.
So for us, at this point of our lives, for us to take on a mortgage, let us make that decision, quite honestly, as far as changing the mortgage rules, because we've paid $200,000 over the last 10 years and have had zero equity.
Yeah.
If we lost it all right now, we'd be in the same position. We'd just be renters on the street. So for us, for somebody to look at the mortgage rules and say, we'd have to think creatively to let other people be able to get into the home ownership market would be a plus for us.
So you like his idea?
I do.
Okay. Well, let's give him that one. We'll leave it there. All right, time for our final voter. Watch this.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Omer Ali. I'm 30 years old and I live in Brampton, Ontario. I'm currently working as an analytics manager in the corporate retail world. I like to spend my free time playing sports and cooking. I was 7 years old when my family immigrated from Pakistan to Canada. Being a first-generation Canadian and an immigrant child puts you in this unique position because it allows you to pursue your Canadian dream, all the while being protected from the hardships of an immigrant life by your parents. Historically, I have voted for either the Liberals or the Conservatives, depending on the issues that are important to me.
Mr. Scheer.
Very good to meet you.
Very nice to meet you too. So, as I mentioned, historically, I'm someone who's voted for the Liberals and the Conservatives. However, I do like conservative fiscal policies. However, I'm finding it difficult to cast my ballot this time around for the Conservatives. As a brown Muslim man, where do I fit in the Conservative Party?
You fit right at home. We are an open and inclusive party that we've had tremendous support from Muslim Canadians. We've had Muslim members of Parliament, and we have the first Muslim senator as well. And we welcome people from all over the world, regardless of faith or background.
So you have backed a candidate locally in Mississauga who has said some very Islamophobic things in the past. You yourself have spoken at Yellow Vest rallies, and your campaign chair is a former director of Rebel Media. It just doesn't kind of work.
Well, I'll challenge some of the misconceptions that you've brought up. I spoke at a rally in support of the energy sector, attended by thousands of people who are desperate, who are out of work, who have seen their businesses go under, and who have lost their homes and are just in a tremendous state of anxiety and fear for the future. And the organizers of that event took great pains, took great steps to keep it focused on the energy sector, and that's what I was speaking to. And the candidate that you mentioned has taken responsibility for comments that she had retweeted and apologized and recommitted her support for diversity and inclusion and celebrating the contributions that Muslims have made to this country.
So going back to the rally, I understand what you're saying, and I do understand that the purpose of the rallies and the history of the Yellow Vest movement is for jobs and people who are hurting because they don't have work anymore. But there's a different undertone in that movement in Canada. There is a sort of a racist rhetoric, very anti-immigration. I mean, Faith Goldie was there speaking as well. So it's hard
No,
Yeah, I
I'm,
mean, it's
I'm
hard
glad
to see.
I'm glad you're asking these questions because it's just not true. This wasn't a so-called yellow vest rally. This was an energy sector rally. This was people who support our energy sector, who want to see pipelines built again, who have the frustration. Can you imagine watching a small business in the energy sector go under and auction off equipment to American companies who are driving those rigs across the border just to invest in the energy sector in a country that we're competing with? That's what this event was at. And the person you mentioned was not invited. She was not part of it. It was down the street, and the Liberals and NDP tried to make the association. And what I said at the time was, I'm not going to let that happen. I'm not going to allow that brush to be painted on the thousands of Canadians who are there to fight for their jobs and fight for their industry. I will always speak out against those people who spread hateful messages. That's not what that event was about. I was there to show my support for the hardworking men and women who are affected by Justin Trudeau's energy policies.
Can you say today that you'll have any policies going forward if you are elected into office for being a more inclusive party?
Well, yes. I mean, we support programs that celebrate multiculturalism and celebrate the contribution of Canadians from all around the world. I've been honored to be invited into the homes of so many people to celebrate Muslim holy days, and that's something I'm going to continue to do to show the signal that there's a home for you here. We are a party that welcomes people from all walks of life, from all backgrounds. As long as you believe in fiscal responsibility, lower taxes, and more vibrant economy, you have a home in our party, no matter what your background is, no matter what faith you practice, no matter what country you come from originally.
Okay, Omar, good job. I'm going to come up and do a little work now, too. You good?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks, Omar. I have a couple follow-ups, if that's okay. I'm going to follow up just on the issue of...
I guess it's your show. You can kind of
yeah, it's true.
set the rules.
On diversity and inclusion. You have said that you support LGBTQ rights, but you won't march in a pride parade. What's the big deal?
Well, there's just lots of different ways to show support to a community, and I show my support by, for example, participating in the historic apology for public servants who are persecuted because of their sexual orientation. I've called on the government to do more to welcome people from around the world who are persecuted because of their sexual orientation as well, and that's the way I'll continue to show my support.
You said on Tout le monde en parle this past Sunday that if one of your children was gay, that would be fine, you would accept them. Can you explain to Canadians how your thoughts on homosexuality have evolved? Because clearly they have.
Well, there's nothing my children can do that would make me stop loving them, and I will support them in their life always, and that's something I've always believed in and will always continue to believe in.
But to the question.
Yeah, well, society had...
I'm glad you like your kids, but how has your opinion? How has your opinion on homosexuality evolved since previous things you've said?
I've always been a strong defender for the rights of all Canadians and recognize
that. But that's not true. But that's not true. We've seen that video where you said...
I've recognized the inherent dignity of every single Canadian and recognize and celebrate the fact that people can be who they want to be in this country.
But have you always thought that is what I'm asking you?
Absolutely. The question that we had as a society, as a country at the time was around marriage, and the debate in Parliament was to change the definition of marriage. There were members of Parliament from all different parties who voted on different sides of this issue. I represented the views of my constituents and my thoughts at the time on marriage.
I guess I just don't understand. Why is it so difficult for you to explain how your thinking has evolved? What is
Rosie, I've said society has had its conversation. We had our debate. We had
that's
two.
Society. I'm asking about you personally.
Let me finish.
You personally.
We had two votes in the House of Commons. Yeah. We had two elections where this was an issue. Society has moved on. It is the law of the land. I support that, and we will continue to focus on other things. This is not something that is an issue. It's been settled in Canada. The Canadians accept the definition of marriage now as it is, and as I said, society's moved on. I've moved on.
Did you lie about being an insurance broker?
No, not at all.
No. But you weren't one.
I received my accreditation from the Canadian Accredited Insurance Broker Program.
But after you had left.
No, I received my accreditation while I was there.
But not the license.
When I was 24, working in an insurance office, doing all kinds of things, supporting the insurance company, I received my accreditation from the Canadian Accredited Insurance Broker Program, and I left the office just before the licensing process.
I'm ending with the same question, and it's about you, so hopefully that's easy. And the question is this: what personal quality do you have that would make you a good prime minister? The thing that would give you an edge, if you will?
Well, I believe my personal background has given me a unique insight onto the challenges that hardworking families face. We're hearing more and more that this election is about affordability.
But your personal quality. What's your personal thing?
Growing up in that household, having that understanding, being able to relate to people who are going through difficult financial decisions themselves. I have also my own personal characteristic. I pride myself on ensuring that I've heard all points of view, that I consult around the table. I don't mind when people challenge me at all. We have people get up in caucus sometimes and say, you know, that thing you said, I don't know, I disagree with that. And then I think about that, I reflect, and rather than getting angry that they've challenged me, I challenge myself and say, okay, well, this is a smart person in my caucus or around our shadow cabinet table. I better be darn sure. And so I'll go back and say, you know what? I am right, and here's why. Or thank you for challenging me, because I was wrong, and you showed me where we should be going instead. And so having that type of team approach to our caucus, I think, has served me very well.
Okay. Thanks to our questioners. They were fantastic. To our audience, and of course to you, the Conservative leader, Andrew Scheer, for making the time. I know you're very busy. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Tomorrow, you will hear from Green Party leader Elizabeth May. NDP leader Jagmeet Singh will join us on Thursday. And if you missed our conversation with Justin Trudeau, you can find it now on the CBC News app, CBC Gem. And for the record, because some people have asked, Maxime Bernier declined our invitation. I'm Rosemary Barton. We'll see you again tomorrow. Thanks. Great.